This is Cris Tales, an indie JRPG that just recently released, and as someone who grew up with JRPGs and is especially a fan of stuff like Final Fantasy, I love the genre in general. It's one of the earliest exposures to RPGs for me as a kid. Any game that's coming out and is touting itself as a love letter to classic JRPGs, like this game is, definitely gets my attention. Love letter is definitely a pretty strong phrase to use, but I think after playing the game for a while, it is pretty clear that the developer's passion for the genre does definitely shine through, from small references like characters named things like Biggs and Wedge and Fyra and Vyraga, to other elements and even some mechanical stuff that's similar to classic JRPGs like Super Mario RPG's rhythm mechanics, for instance. It's pretty obvious that the developers grew up with JRPGs just like I did, and that their passion for the genre shines through in their product. The first thing you'll obviously notice is that the game is gorgeous. It's very, very pretty. It's got this, what I would describe as like an early 2000s Cartoon Network art style, I guess you could say. It looks really nice. It's very colorful and it's very well animated. Everything is hand-drawn, and the animations for pretty much everything are nice. Even in combat, the animations tend to have a lot of character to them. The enemy animations have a lot of charm. And the overall presentation goes for something sort of like a stained glass look, I guess you could say. The idea is that you're a time mage, and you can see the past, present, and future of all things at the same time, and this manifests mostly as the screen being split into 3 sections while you're walking around, which looks very cool, by the way, and is a really cool way to present that information to the player, with the past being on the left, the present in the middle, and the future on the right. And you're tasked with making the world a bit of a better place, one town at a time, by solving the problems, by being able to peer into the future and sort of seeing what's going to happen and try to prevent it, as well as the overarching goal to be find the Time Empress before she does bad things to the entire world. So it's actually a relatively standard JRPG plot, all things considered, and you of course be recruiting a cast of characters along the way to help you. Gameplay-wise, the game definitely has a lot going on. It's got a lot going for it. The mechanics are relatively complex for a JRPG, and the turn-based battles are quite a lot of fun. So the battles use, as I mentioned, a sort of rhythm system, a bit like Super Mario RPG uses, where you can hit the A button at the exact time that either you get hit or that one of your attacks lands to boost the damage or add an extra attack or reduce the damage or just do something. And this is actually even more important in this game than it is in a game like Super Mario RPG, because it makes a massive difference to the amount of damage you take and the amount of damage you deal. You know, you may get hit for like 60 damage, but if you parry it just right with the timing, you'll take like 12. Or you may do like 20 damage, but if you time it just right, you'll do like an extra 80 or something. It's a very, very large difference that the system makes, so it's very important to get the rhythms right, and just about every special attack or just basic attack can be timed like this to add extra effects, which is pretty cool, because adding any sort of extra active element to turn-based combat is always a nice thing. And of course, in addition to each character's attacks and special skills and spells and all that stuff, you do have control of time in a limited capacity, and you can choose to take the left side of the screen into the past and the right side of the screen into the future at any point during battle, as long as you have the resources to do it. And you can get attacked on both sides by enemies. In most combats, you'll have some enemies on each side. And this whole time thing opens up some pretty interesting strategies. For instance, you could soak someone with water magic and then send them into the future to rust them and drastically reduce their defense. You could put someone back into the past before they buffed themselves to make them weaker again, or you could, for instance, poison someone and then send them into the future in order to have the poison expire all at once and have all those turns of damage just stack up all in one big burst of poison damage instead. There are even some characters that you get later on in the story that have attacks that can interact with each side of the screen, so you can actually choose which enemies are where during combat, and also can interact with the different time states, so that there's a character that throws projectiles, and depending on if they go into the present, the future, or the past, the projectiles can change. So all in all, this gives the combat a pretty tactical feel. It's a really nice turn-based combat system with a good amount of complexity, a good amount of depth. It's you do it pretty often. The encounter rate in this game is fairly high, but it is at least a fun enough and active enough combat system to be worth doing. Although I will say the game, combat-wise, is quite easy. Even the big boss fights and stuff, they don't really take a whole lot to take down. The overall combat difficulty of this game is on the easier side. And while you're in towns, you'll have access to this whole split screen thing, where your screen is in 3 sections and you can see the past, present, and future all at once. You can also use your adorable top-hatted frog friend to hop between the time streams to do stuff like listen to conversations happening in one time or another, or pick up items from chests that only exist in certain timelines and things like that. and you can use this pretty much as you want, and this is where the game really shines, is when it allows you to mess with the 3 timelines and sort of see the different states of each city that you're in each different timeline. There's a lot of effort, a lot of work has been put into the towns of the game, and the fact that you can see each of them in 3 different states. It's actually a really well realized effect that is my favorite part of the game's presentation. It looks super cool. Each of the towns has a very different look in each different timeline, and you'll see stuff like past construction turn into present buildings, turn into future ruins, and you'll see children growing up into adults, and you'll see adults with children growing up into, you know, adults with teenagers growing up into just full-grown lonely adults where the parent is gone now, and it's just a really nice, really well-realized effect of being able to see these time streams, and it's the most fascinating part of the game, and it must have taken a lot of effort to do, because with all this hand-drawn art, the fact that you basically have to draw NPCs and locations and towns 3 separate times to have them all match up like this, it just seems like a whole lot of effort to go through. And you'll be using this 3 time stream thing to solve your problems, to help yourself through the main questline. Of course, you'll have to solve the woes of each town you come across, which is a lot of fetch quests and side quests and things, and every town you're in, you'll be looking into the past, present, and future to figure out what is going wrong and what you can do to stop it. From going into the past to get some old blueprints that were stolen, to going into the future to listen to a conversation that hasn't happened yet to allow you to understand what's going to happen in a few minutes in the present. It's all a pretty cool idea that allows you to use this whole time stream manipulation thing in different ways to solve the sort of local woes of each town before you move on to the next town, and of course in the overall goal of chasing the Time Empress and trying to stop her before she can destroy everything. In terms of like upgrades and character development and stuff, that uses the classic JRPG system of characters learning new skills and spells as they level up, but you can also go to towns and buy or find equipment for them, and there's various different equipment slots, and of course there's also a way to upgrade the weapons of each person that gets more and more expensive for each upgrade, but drastically increases their stats and is very much worth doing. And there are also keychains you can find. Every weapon can have one keychain attached to it that will change its characteristics in some way, from making it deal tons more physical damage to making it set enemies on fire. There's a keychain for just about everything. This is all well and good and makes for a pretty solid gameplay-wise JRPG. However, I do have a major problem with this game in that it seems to have sort of the opposite problem from what a lot of JRPGs have. Okay, so bear with me here. What a lot of JRPGs do that people don't like is they make the main character special in some way that doesn't really come across in gameplay. They have some sort of powers or something special about them that happens during cutscenes and during story moments, but is something that you can't really use during gameplay. The gameplay is pretty standard turn-based combat stuff, and in cutscenes your main character is awesome in some way that you don't get to control. I feel that this game goes entirely in the opposite direction and makes a lot of the cool complexity and stuff just for battles and just in the mechanics, and have almost none of it actually affect the story in a meaningful way. It's very frustrating to say this because I like the game from a conceptual standpoint and I love its aesthetic and I like the gameplay, but from a narrative standpoint the game really doesn't grab me because I feel that it does a lot of things wrong. I would call this a game of possibilities, as in there's a lot of stuff, a lot of potential that could happen, but only some of those possibilities are really well realized. For instance, the fact that your main character can see all 3 time streams at once you feel would make her interact with people a little bit differently, but for some reason it really doesn't, and the fact that she can do this never really comes up in the cutscenes. In the cutscenes you only see the present, you never get to see the past or the future, unless it specifically does for just a brief moment to show you something, but for the most part the implication is that your character isn't really using these powers during the cutscenes to actually change anything, which feels inherently very strange when she is supposed to be this powerful time mage, and it never really seems to affect much. And this idea very much extends to the character development as well. For instance, you start the game in a battle with the main character, who seems pretty serious at that point, and then you sort of back up in time a little bit for the tutorial and you see her as this timid orphan girl. So you think, okay, this is going to be like the story of this girl sort of, you know, losing her innocence a little bit and having to fight and having to become less timid over time. No, not at all actually. That timid orphan girl thing only lasts for like the first few minutes of gameplay. As soon as she gets the sword, she instantaneously changes into the like stoic time warrioress, and that's pretty much all the development that she gets in the first few hours of the game. That it's very very strange. It feels like you missed something. It feels like there should have been multiple scenes there that actually explained this, but there's not. It's just she starts out as a timid orphan girl, gets a sword, becomes a time mage, that's it. And really the same could be said of all of your companions as well. After, 8 hours of going through the game, 8 or 9 hours, they pretty much feel exactly the same as when I first recruited them into the party. And that's one of the big things about JRPGs to me. They're just as much about the individual paths of the characters that you meet and help along the way and actually form your party from, as they are about the main narrative of what your characters are supposed to be doing. You're supposed to have all these character building moments of finding out about their pasts and their wishes and why they're joining you and all this stuff, and it develops them further into better characters than how they started, but it doesn't really feel like this game ever takes the opportunity to do that. And in fact, there's a lot of potential, as I mentioned earlier, for a really cool version of this, where, for instance, you could have a problem with one of your new companions and you feel like they're hiding something from you, so you look into their past, since you can see their past, present, and future, and you betray their trust by looking into their past but finding out what's actually wrong with them, and there's this whole big scene of development because you do that. Or maybe you look into the future and see a character as like a bitter, lonely person after the events of the game, and you have to figure out what's causing them to feel this way to change them now so that they don't end up like that. There's all these possibilities for this time power and how it could help the development of the characters that you have in your party, and it's never used on them at all. You never see the past or the future versions of the characters in your party. The fact that you can do this whole 3 time stream thing never actually collides with the characters that you have with you. They just disappear. You never see them. So that's what I mean by a game that has a lot of potential but doesn't realize a lot of it. It seems to have a lot of really, really cool mechanical ideas, but it doesn't put all of them into the narrative in the way that it should to make the narrative as interesting as I feel that it could be. The story and the characters could be way more interesting and way less sort of bog standard JRPG tropey characters that they are. For instance, the first character that you get in your party, Christopher, looks like the classic, JRPG stoic warrior dude who is like the tank. He's got a big shield, right? He's gonna be like the shield guy. But in terms of gameplay, he subverts those expectations. His shield splits into 2 blades and he actually has quite powerful physical attacks. He also is an elemental mage and takes the role of the game's black mage by doing the most like magic damage of any character in the game. He has pretty much a spell for every element, so he's not just the tank dude, he's also the mage at the same time. So that makes him a really interesting character mechanically because he subverts your expectations for what this character is going to do in your party, but none of that applies to him as an actual person. And this is what I mean. It seems like a lot of the effort went into the gameplay of this game and not into the narrative, because in the gameplay he's really interesting. In the narrative he's your bog standard, hopeless romantic warrior dude. And overall, it just really feels like such a shame, because I really want to tell you that this game is absolutely worth playing and that I really, really like it, because I enjoyed the gameplay of it, but, the gameplay is only one half of a very important 2-half sandwich when it comes to RPGs, especially JRPGs, where the narrative and the characters and the story are extremely important, and I feel that the gameplay is where this game shines, and almost none of that shine really makes it over to the story side. And this is compounded with some other problems, like there's a lot of grammatical errors and some dialogue and things like character descriptions. The fact that the game is fully voice acted is awesome, and the voice acting is all really, really good, but in a lot of descriptions of items and characters and things, they'll refer to them as like him and her in the same sentence. Sometimes there's a lot of misspellings and stuff, and the game is also a little bit buggy here and there. I've had problems with textures disappearing and just being in a floating void for a while, so it feels like this is a game that just isn't quite there yet. This feels like a game that needs some more time in the oven, that has a lot of really cool gameplay ideas and a lot of really fun gameplay mechanics, but hasn't had a chance to apply those to the rest of itself yet, to apply that level of polish to everything. And as far as a JRPG story goes, there are just too many holes that I can poke in, and the more holes you poke in it, the more you start to realize that the game's $40 price tag is maybe just a little bit too much. So this is a JRPG that I can recommend for heavy fans of the genre like me that are looking for a fun gameplay experience but don't care too much about the story, because the aesthetic of this game is amazing, the voice acting is great, the battles are fun, but the characters and the storyline just do not do it for me, and they might not do it for you either, just because of so many missed potential possibilities that could be there that simply aren't. So thank you guys very much for watching. The link is, as always, in the description below this video to the Steam store page if you want to check this game out yourself. I would recommend checking it out on sale if you can get it for like 25 or 30 bucks. I think that's actually a much more reasonable proposition. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.